Thank you, Sarah. Just have a look at you. Thanks very much for turning out this evening, on this dull evening. You thought you'd come to see Martin Lambie-Nairn, you got Ronnie Corbett. What I thought I'd do is, I'm literally going to spend a couple of minutes by way of introduction just to sort of say where I came from. And then we'll get into the main body of the talk. It's expected to take about anything between 45 minutes to an hour. I'll try, if I can see you shifting in your seats, I'll just speed up. That's right. And if anything technical goes wrong, I'm going to look at you over there. Because it always terrifies the life out of me, the technical bit. Anyway, so before I get on to the main chat, let me just introduce myself by giving you a little bit of background. I started in the design business as a graphic designer in television, and there were no computers, there were no Macs or digital anything. There's a lot of cardboard, a lot of cell, and a lot of 35mm film and 16mm film, and I used to make opening sequences for the BBC. In fact, I started at the BBC. And I was not very good at it. And that is not, that is true. I was not very good at it. And for 10 years, I continued to work for different television stations. And for 10 years, I continued to be not very good at it. And then I discovered current affairs. And there used to be a program called Weekend World that used to go out on ITV on Sundays at lunchtime. And it was regarded as ITV's premier current affairs show anyway. And they were offering the opportunity for a freelance graphic designer to work for that slot only. And basically, it meant working 24 hours solid with a lot of cardboard and letraset. And that one job paid me the same salary as if I worked for 5 days. So I took this thing up and worked and became their graphic designer, which I have to say it was in one way, in terms of graphic design, was terribly dull, but in another way, it was actually really rather exciting because I was working with journalists a good deal of the time, and that's something I hadn't been used to doing. So I took this job because I could draw a bit, and I could design a bit, and I could make short graphic films. More importantly, I knew the difference between a SAM missile, a Russian SAM missile, and an American Pershing missile, which came in handy, or who the leader of the TUC was, or who the leader of the miners' union was. I was interested in those things. I happened to be interested in those things. I even knew where Cuba was. Although on one occasion I produced a map that attached Namibia to South Africa and nearly caused an international incident. So for 5 years then I worked with these journalists and producers and directors of current affairs. And then I not only became good at it, but I became the designer that they actually liked working with, which was pretty rare because most journalists don't like designers very much. I think we all have slightly limp wrists and walk around thinking, I think it should be pink or something like that. Anyway, but I got on terribly well with these people. And this contract for Weekend World actually formed the basis for my company because other people on the ITV network said, well, we want a bit of this and we want a bit of that. And so I actually had 3 clients after a while, and that formed the basis of my company, which I called Lambie-Nairn, probably because it was easy for me to remember. Okay, in the years that followed, we grew to quite a large company. Sometimes there were 100 of us, and we worked for clients all over the world, no longer in current affairs, but I suddenly became able, and my colleague, because I employed a lot of people who were better than me, that's a good idea, who came along, and the company's reputation grew, and we went from nowhere to somewhere. Despite the fact I was trained as a graphic designer, I actually have had 3 careers. I've been a graphic designer, as I've said, in television. I was for 10 years a director, directing commercials, which I was absolutely awful at, and I don't know how I lasted 10 years. Fortunately, all of these things were going concurrently, so by the time they found out that I was a crap director, I was sort of managing to be an all right designer, I suppose. And finally, I ended up in the branding business, which is actually slightly different from the design business. as a creative director, and that's what I've been doing now. That's what I do now, and as Sarah says, that I left my company after 30 years of being in charge of all that, and I've joined some friends in a company called Heavenly as their creative director. A sucker for punishment, you might think. Anyway, so back to the talk. Now you may think that striving to be original in our business is that everybody wants to do that. The clients actually really want us to be original all the time. Sadly, I don't think that's true. I've worked in, funnily enough, I worked in the broadcasting business pretty well all of my life, one way or another. And with two notable exceptions, most broadcasters want their channels to look like the competition, which those of you involved in branding will go, what? You know, book one, first paragraph, first sentence, be different, you know. But not in the television business, it was in the television branding business. Oh, I like, can you do that BBC Two thing for us? Why would I do that? Why? That's BBC Two. Anyway. So, but being different to many clients is not always an aspiration, and this is not something that's within the broadcasting business, it's within the non-broadcasting business as well. So doing it differently requires courage from a client and consultant alike, because it means that what is being proposed has probably not been done before, or has not been done before, which means success cannot be guaranteed, which means that you're taking a calculated risk, which means that if it goes wrong, somebody is going to lose their job. And I have to say that for every successful project we've ever been involved in, being different was the key to its success. When we were asked to rebrand BBC Two back in 1990, which seems like, gosh, it was a long time ago, the researcher told them that the British people thought the channel was worthy and dull. In fact, they were asked, the respondents were asked, if it were a person, what would this person be? And they said, well, it would be, it came back on several occasions, a 55-year-old man, which by the way is young to me, so, but anyway, a 55-year-old man who wore a tweed jacket with frayed cuffs, smoked a pipe, drove an old Volvo, and owned a Labrador dog. Now, this was not good news to the program director, who had just invested a hell of a lot of money in new comedy and drama aimed at the 20 to 35-year-olds. And this was a particular audience. They were only aiming at an educated audience at the time. But they couldn't afford to change the programming. Obviously, that's all been commissioned and was going ahead. So they did decide to change the identity. Now, when this project was commissioned, British television was nearly all, you know, identified with 3D shiny logos, and we decided that we had to be different. We had to kind of get out of this thing. And our logo would be neither shiny, nor would it be 3D, nor would we attempt to invest in the logo type or the personality. And you'll find that in pretty well all of our work. We try not to. A lot of design, you get a brief and saying, well, we're about this, and our values are this, and sometimes our clients expect us to take hold of all these values and this personality and go, and out the plane pops a logo with all this stuff on it. You know, it's like, and it's always seemed utter nonsense to me. It's always seemed a complete and utter nonsense. You can't do it. We started to look for different ways of doing that, and this was kind of the start of this journey. So how are we going to invest personality and not do it with the logo? In fact, the logo for BBC Two at the time was just a bit of type. It's 3 boxes and a thing that said TWO, which the program director kept saying, why are we called BBC Two? I didn't think it was funny, actually. I got really bored with it. Anyway, so we were going to introduce personality through what we called a property, and as you know, we chose this numeral 2. And this was all new to us, and it turned out to be amazingly flexible, this tool, because we could reflect any personality you want with this. It could be witty, it could be, intriguing, it could be surprising, it could be completely bonkers. And all of these things were the kind of the values of the channel, where they were taking the channel. So the first set of these, you may or may not remember, these are all designed to have voiceover, of course. Now, at the time, no other channel was branded like this, and I have to say we had absolutely no idea how the audience were going to take this. Thought we probably all lost our senses or something. However, it was made clear to us by our client that one person who had a very strong view on it was the program director, who thought it was total rubbish. And he hated it so much that he was going to take it off the air within 2 weeks. He was apoplectic, he was bouncing off the walls. You know, he was so angry about this. And our client was really in the firing line on this, because she was the one who'd been brave, and she'd stepped out to do this thing differently. She handled the budget, and she was responsible. So for her, this was incredibly serious. 2 weeks before this, it was 1 week into this 2-week period before it's going to be pulled off the screen as a disgrace. The program controller went to happened to have dinner with Charlie Saatchi and Lord Rogers, who wasn't Lord then, but the architect. And during the dinner, Charlie Saatchi leant over to him and said, "You know those two things that you've got on the screen?" And the program director went, "Yeah, yes." And he said, "God, they're absolutely bloody marvellous. They're absolutely fantastic. Do you think so? You think so?" And then the next thing that happened, the very next day, we had a note down saying, "Changed my mind about it. It'll stay on. Probably not so bad as that." You know. So that's how it got on the air, and it's amazing. You'd think when I talk about people wanting creativity, when it actually comes to it, it comes that close sometimes to stuff actually getting out there. The BBC One balloon, you remember that thing, which I'm not going to talk about this evening. We were sitting watching all the work that we had done for this. It was supposed to be going out 2 days later. We happened to be sitting in the head of presentations, and by the way, the very same program director, who was the one on BBC Two, sitting there, and they were both looking like they were about to be shot. You know, they looked at this stuff and they're going, "We don't, what's," and they'd been all part of the process, and they had actually now it was crunch time. It was going on the air. And they were sitting there, and we played it 4 times. My God, I mean, 15 idents played 4 times. You know, you could go on summer holiday in that time. And it's like, and it just so happened that the director of programs walked through the door and said, for another meeting, and said, "Hello, what's the matter? What's happened?" And they said, "Oh, we're just looking at these new BBC One idents." He said, "Flipping fantastic, aren't they? Really great." I went, "I'm so pleased." And they all went, "Oh." And exactly the same. "Do you think so?" "Well, don't you? What's the problem?" And that's how it got on the air. so comes that close. The thing is that once this thing got on the air, the audience wasn't doubtful at all, and it's actually amazing what happened. To our relief, I have to say, because we were really unconfident by this time. After 3 months, the research went back out to the very same respondents who had actually sort of said it was kind of boring, dull and worthy and all that sort of thing. And they got back a whole chunk of research which said they now thought the channel was witty and surprising, which is precisely what we'd aimed at. And we didn't even tell them what the words were. They even came back with the right words, bless their hearts. Anyway, and this was kind of amazing, because it was the identity that changed, not the channel. None of the programs changed. And I have to say that's the only time in my life when that has happened. But what was quite nice is a nice little end to this is that this BBC Two thing got nominated for BAFTA thingamajig. Coincidentally, the BAFTA people invited the program director, who had been the guy who'd, you know, our problem, to first present the BAFTA. And when it came to, and there are a whole load of things, you know, 5 or 6 things could have got this graphics award or whatever they called it. Anyway, and we got it. So as I was walking up to the stage, he was holding it, going, and I was going. And when he handed him, he said, "I know." Bless his heart. We actually became good friends after that, but with some dodgy moments. Some years later, a new channel director arrived, and this kind of happens quite a bit, and the target audience changed, and so did the programming. She wanted to increase the audience to attract younger people, and so we needed to change the identity to do this without losing the existing audience. So we kept the twos and made it into a character, you may remember. What then happened was that amazingly these twos became famous, and it's sort of there were newspaper articles written about them, and they became the subjects of dinner party conversations, and they even had their own fan mail. God, how sad is that? But I mean, it's true. More importantly, the audience grew when other audiences from other channels were shrinking, simply because of the dilution of audiences with cable and satellite. But their audience grew. So doing it differently in this case paid off, but then, gosh, there were some pretty dodgy moments for my client, who had been supported through this in thick and thin. And her courage was finally rewarded, thank goodness, because she was promoted. And she became sort of the doyen of branding after that, I think. And but by Jove, does she deserve it? Because, you know, when you are not in control, you're just sort of the person there going, "I think it works." And there's some lunatic like me going, "Yeah, it's going to be fine." And then your boss comes in and says, "It's the biggest load of crap they've ever seen." Where do you go? Where do you go? Nowhere to hide, is there? It's like, it's pretty frightening business. BBC News, this is a story of consistency. BBC News, you may or may not know, is one of the largest news organisations in the world, if not the largest news organisation in the world. And it has correspondents in places that you and I have never heard of. 2 years ago, they realised that their brand was totally inconsistent and chaotic. And it was managed by editors and producers who are jolly good at their jobs, but they did it the way they wanted to do it from the different programs. And so, frankly, it was left unmanaged. And this caused it to project inconsistent messages around the world. It was one thing in the Arab states to this country, or in Europe, and so on and so forth. And the BBC brand needed unifying, not just in ways the way it looked, but in the way it was managed. And their output included television, radio and online news, global and national news, news from Wales, news from Scotland, and of course news from Northern Ireland, 17 local radio networks, a 24-hour news channel, a 24-hour channel covering Parliament, plus countless current affairs programmes. So it's absolutely chocker with branding issues, and the list is enormous. The project here was to not just, it wasn't about graphics, even though I'm going to show you some opening sequences and things like that. It was about the sets as well. So the sets you see now are the sets which were all part of that project. And it's exactly the same principle as the NOS thing, where the brand runs right the way through absolutely everything they do. But what was clear is we needed an identity with flexibility, because, you know, we needed to be relevant to the different programs, and as well as actually having some kind of consistency, some kind of visual glue that hold things together. And the key to rationalize to rationalizing this chaos was a very simple brand architecture. And it works like this. Level 1 is kind of like pure, and as it says here, pure unadulterated daily news. I mean, full on, just about news, the bulletins, the 10, the 6, the 1, and also the news channel. Level 2, so that was full on brand identities, consistency. Level 2 had to be relevant to the nation or the region. And you in Northern Ireland have a version of it on your. Remind me what the program's called. Somebody the news. No, it's Newsline. That's right, Newsline. Thank you. I flipping did it, but I mean, yeah. You could go next door. Anyway, but that it had to be, had to be relevant to Newsline, and then level 3 was news for specific audiences. For instance, BBC Parliament, people who watch that. So, and as we go down, we go slightly further away from the main brand language, but we have an interpretation of it until you get to things like level 4, which is something like question time. And then right down to level 5, current affairs, which you just simply want to put a logo on the end saying this was done by the news department, and it hasn't, so it had to have that kind of flexibility right the way through. So this is how it worked then. Level 1 then, this is pretty familiar. World News, which looks almost exactly the same as the 10. Just to say that this is where music really is incredibly important. When I first did a news thing some time ago, I don't know, 10 years ago, all news had this pomposity. The music had this terrible pomposity. It had lots of violins and French horns. It was, and they all wondered why. And all the people say, well, why do they think we're so pompous? And you go, God, I mean, would I go and buy that music? No. And so one of the things we can do here is we can actually stop being so silly and actually produce some music that actually you might actually hear in a disco, or you might, you might like it. You might even like it, and so let's use that to actually take all the pomposity out of it. But at the same time, it had to sound newsy. So. I'd always thought, I was mentioning this earlier, I'd always thought that the best identity for anything was the pips. The beep, 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 beep. This is the news from BBC, all that business. And so, right through after the war, right to, we've heard that. It's the thing that happens before the news. So we nick that, we'll have some of that, we'll take those pips and we'll put that into our music, and actually as identity. And for only once in my life have I ever had a musician come back with the music right first time. Normally it's a pretty painful affair, not because anybody's silly or not good at what they do, it's just a painful affair, end of story. But this guy, called David Lowe, went away with that brief and something, stopped being so flipping pompous and come back with something, and he came back with that music. And I just think it's a wonderful piece of music, and it works fantastically everywhere. And it kind of set a different standard for news music in my view. This is level 2 then. So we're moving away. This is what it looks like. I think it's in Scotland. Similar language, but relevant. Level 3, this is specific audiences. So it still has a family resemblance, but it's more relevant. this one is the only example I've got of it, and I have to say it doesn't quite work for me. But level 4 is not quite enough newsiness in it, but this is nearly right. The type's the same as Gill. And then just bong the logo on the end of things. So that just identifies you're not. So with all of that breadth, you're able to do the different shows, but at the same time, you're able to have a consistent sort of. You're able to build the BBC News brand. Now, and the trick about that whole thing was that the BBC took it seriously. They really, really took it seriously, and they understood. I mean, even the journalists who hated me, because whenever they see anybody to do with branding, they all they can think of is the money going out the door to somebody who does logos, and it's very difficult because. They don't want you there, so you have to work with people who really don't want you there. And the trick is, by the way, because they're not unreasonable people, they just have different sort of priorities. That's fair enough. But the trick is to actually get them to turn and actually to appreciate it. And by the end of this process, we had a lot of friends who were editors rather than a lot of enemies, because they got it. They suddenly got it, and it actually worked for them. And it made them look better. It made what they did look better. And so it had a very good internal thing, and it had a fantastic external thing, because the BBC News around the world suddenly looked like, Coca-Cola around. It's a properly managed brand, and it's managed to this day that way. Just one more thing. Keep it simple, but that'll have to wait for another day. Thanks very much for listening.